by Deborah Falk. A chalice lit in our midst is a symbol of our liberal faith, a faith built on the foundations of freedom, reason, and welcome, a faith sustained by acts of kindness and justice, a faith that envisions a world flourishing with equality for all people, a faith that demands the living out of goodness, a faith that requires thoughtfulness, a faith of wholeness. This tiny flame is the symbol of the spark, all of this within us. May it be so. And now for the green candle. We light this green candle to affirm our commitment to caring for the planet that is our home.
We covenant to create a caring, affirming, and inclusive community that invites each of us to become our best self. We covenant.
Good morning, everyone. So great to see you. And welcome to everyone who is in our digital sanctuary this morning. Our opening words are by Kathleen McTeague. Into this home we bring our hunger for awakening. We bring passionate hearts and our will toward justice. Into this home we bring the courage to walk after hard losses. Into this home we bring our joy and gratitude for ordinary blessings. And by our gathering, we bless this space. And in its shelter, we know we are blessed. March is the month we celebrate the achievements of women in the world. And this Sunday, we will learn about the achievements of 4 remarkable women in different fields and spheres of influence. These women have been researched by their presenters, and I just want to say what a joy it has been to produce this service with you. Our opening hymn is I Am Woman, Hear Me Roar by Helen Reddy.
I am woman, hear me roar, the numbers too big to ignore, and I know too much to go back and pretend. 'Cause I've heard it all before, and I've been down there on the floor, and no one's ever gonna keep me down again.
Oh yes, I am wise, but it's wisdom born of pain. Yes, I paid the price, but look how much I gained.
If I had to, I could do anything. I am strong, I am invincible, I am woman. You can bend but never break me, 'cause it only serves to make me more determined to achieve my final goal. And I'll come back even stronger, not a novice any longer, 'cause you've deepened the conviction in my soul. Yes, I am wise, but it's wisdom born from man. Yes, I paid the price, but look how much I gave. If I have to, I can wear the pain, 'cause I am strong. I am invincible. Watch me grow, see me standing toe to toe as I spread my loving arms across the land. But I'm still an embryo with a long, long way to go until I make my brother understand. Oh, yes, I'm wise, but it's wisdom born of pain. Oh, yes, I paid the price, but look how much I gave. If I had to, I can do anything. I am strong. I am invincible. Invincible. I am woman. Oh, yes. I am woman. Oh, yes. I am woman. Oh, yes, 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 I am woman. Good night, Australia. Thank you for joining us. I am woman. Oh, yes. 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 I am woman. Oh, yes.
So I have the honor of profiling the first woman that we're going to be speaking about today. Her name is Professor Alice Ball, and she lived from 1892 to 1916. And in that very brief time of 24 years, she actually had quite a history. She was born to a middle-class African-American family of educators in and around Seattle, Washington, went to the University of Hawaii, where she was the first woman to receive a master's degree in chemistry. And she also subsequently became the first woman and African-American chemistry professor at the university. Her claim to fame was that she developed an injectable form of a medication for treating leprosy. And subsequent to her work, 8,000 leprosy patients were able to be discharged from the institutions and the island of Molokai and the many places after thousands of years of this scourge. The sad part was that she died in an accident at age 24, and her work was stolen and published by the professor who would have been her mentor. And it was published under his name without giving credit to her. And it was only in this century that some young women at the University of Hawaii, looking through some of the records, realized that it was not, in fact, this Professor Dean's work, but that it was her work. And went about trying to reverse this breach of academic integrity. And eventually, the method became known as the Ball method for her. And she was honored in 2019 when her name was added, along with Florence Nightingale and Marie Curie, on the frieze outside the London School of Tropical Medicine and Hygiene. And the record corrected that, in fact, she had been the scientist that had helped cure all of these thousands of leprosy patients.
On the on the third Wednesday of every month, I do a silent cheer for Frances Perkins as my Social Security check is deposited, and I'll tell you why. Born on Joy Street in Beacon Hill, right near the State House, on April 10th, 1880, Fanny Coralie Perkins was born to Frederick and Susan. They were from Newcastle, Maine, on the Damariscotta River. They were described as a family of glorious past who had gone to seed. Frederick had trouble making a living. He was a dairy farmer. They moved to Boston, where he became a retail clerk. It was still a big effort to put food on the table. So in 1882, they moved to Worcester, where he worked in a stationery and office supply building. Fanny, as she was known then, Fanny Coralie Perkins, wasn't fond of Worcester. She excelled in school, and she read Jacob Riis's book, How the Other Half Lives. Became drawn to the concepts of social justice. She went to Mount Holyoke, where marriage was a possibility for the future, but not a requirement for a satisfying life. So that appealed to her. She graduated in 1902, went to New York City. Things did not work out. She couldn't find work there. Reluctantly came home to Worcester. 2 years later, there was a job opening in Chicago, and against her parents' wishes, she went there to become a science teacher. She reinvented herself as Frances Perkins, taking the name in honor of a previous mentor. She also converted from the congregational faith to Episcopalian. And that was one of the cornerstones of her life. I was surprised to learn that Frances believed that everything she did to enable the betterment of humankind was rooted in her desire for the glory of God. That was very important to her. She worked at Hull House, which of course was founded by Jane Addams. She associated with many famous people, including Upton Sinclair, the muckraker, and that was a life-changing experience. She heard fiery Union speeches, which was very different from her Republican household back in Worcester. And then she went to the Philadelphia Research and Protective Association, where she was paid $50 a month, which was not much to live on. She also had to raise the funds to pay her own salary and research costs. She worked with immigrant women who were pushed into sexual slavery and prostitution, again, very different from her sort of prim upbringing back home in Worcester. She found them boarding houses and helped them move away from that entrapment. She also visited Fleabag Lodging and testified before city public safety officials. That did not endear her to people like pimps in Chicago. So there was a degree of risk in everything that she did. She then went to Columbia and got a master's in political science. She spoke regularly on street corners about women's suffrage. And then she joined the National Consumers League, which was established to better the working conditions for women. She lobbied against sweatshops, and her principal goal was eliminating child labor. On March 25th, 1911, she personally witnessed the Triangle Shirtwaist Fire, where 146 workers were burned to death, right near the arch at NYU. There's a plaque now. It's the site of an NYU dorm. But that had a profound impact on Frances, and she set about to change the New York State regulations with regard to factory safety mechanisms, such things as not permitting doors to be locked, because that's what happened to the Triangle workers. They were locked in this big building and could not escape the 12 floors. She worked for the state of New York in industrial missions. She met Franklin D. Roosevelt. She had met him in 1912, and when he was governor, she worked very closely with him. That was a lifelong bond that endured until Franklin's death. He trusted her implicitly, and she was completely faithful to his goals. When Franklin wanted to have wanted to appoint her Secretary of Labor, she wanted to make sure that he understood her position, because what she was doing was a fundamental restructuring of American society, enacting historic social welfare and labor laws, like 40-hour a week, minimum wage, workers' compensation, unemployment compensation, banning child labor, direct federal aid for unemployment relief, Social Security, revitalize public employment service, and health insurance. Every one of those goals was met except for the health insurance. She had to overcome opposition from courts, businesses, labor unions, and conservatives. She was extremely unpopular in many parts of the South and was sometimes heckled by the KKK when she came to speak. And Frances' personal life was rather difficult. Her husband, Paul Wilson, whom she married in 1913, and her daughter, Susanna, who was born in 1916, both suffered from what was called manic depression. And there was no lithium back then. What the treatment was being in a sanatorium. Frances was always short on cash because she needed to pay for their care. when Susanna was in her 20s with her own family, Frances gave over her rent-controlled apartment so her daughter would have a secure place to live. That meant she never had a home after that. She lived, in a sense, pillar to post despite her distinguished status in the world. Susanna's mental illness affected the relationship with her mom. Susanna refused to let her mother interact with, she refused to let Frances interact with her grandson. So he never knew her as a child. This caused her to be fatigued, overworked, and ultimately ill herself because of the tension of doing that. She served as Secretary of Labor from 1933 to 1945. One of her greatest achievements was being the principal author of Social Security legislation. Hers was the power behind that. And I think all of us owe her a debt of gratitude. I certainly feel that way. She was on the Industrial Commission for the State of New York also. After Roosevelt died, she stayed on for a couple of months under Harry Truman, but went on to retirement. Again, money was a big issue for her. She had no home, in her estimation. So she went to live in what was sort of like a fraternity at Cornell. It was a wonderful experience for her. The young men who were there adored her, and she taught them a lot. So let's see. Oh my gosh. Sorry. Okay. Okay. She died May 14th, 1965. She was 83 years old. She traveled she was severely ill, nearly died, and traveled on a bus from Ithaca to New York City to seek medical attention, and she died a couple of days later. So her legacy is carried on by her only grandchild, Tomlin Coggeshall. He founded the Frances Perkins Institute at the ancestral family home in Maine, and it's good to know that he is in contact with his grandmother's legacy. So anyway, that's it.
Thank you, Maureen and Lynn. Thank you, Alice Ball and Frances Perkins. Each week, we take time to share our important joys and concerns, so all of us might help carry the burden and join in the celebration. If you are joining us remotely today and wish to share a personal sorrow or joy from your heart, I invite you to unmute your mic, tell us your name, and briefly share. Or you may enter it in the chat, and Mary will read it aloud for you. And I light this last candle for all that remains unspoken in our hearts. Spirit of love, hold us close as we let go of the ones we love, who, no matter what age, we feel they've left us too soon. Companion them and us on our journeys. And Spirit of life, we give thanks for new life coming into the world. What a joy. May mother and baby or babies be safe. And for the blessings of birthdays. another year well lived in this beloved community. May we be a blessing to those in need of our love and care. And now, for all that is spoken and unspoken, let us take a moment of silent meditation.
Hi, so I'm going to give a little chat today about a woman whose name was Florestine Creed Jacobson. Her friends called her Flo. Her colleagues called her Super. I think her husband called her Darling, and I called her Boss. She was my boss for 10 years. She ran the hearings for the Boston Police Department, and I was her court reporter. She was the first African-American superintendent of the Boston Police Department, and I have a few things to say about her. When Flo was 6, she was living in Laurel, Mississippi, with her parents and grandparents. She had 12 aunts and uncles. The family did everything they could to make ends meet, including sharecropping, selling firewood, and domestic cleaning. One day she went outside to help her mother pick cotton. Her mother, Aliana, said, "No daughter of mine is going to pick cotton. Go inside and spend time with Grandma Emma." So she did. And her grandmother's favorite TV show was Perry Mason. 38 years later, Flo received her law degree from New England School of Law. At the time, she was a sergeant in the Boston Police Department and was working in the Internal Affairs Division. In 1954, when Flo was 8, they moved to Boston, where she attended the Charles Street AME Church, the same church that we held her funeral. A couple of facts about her. Florestine Creed Jacobson, and oh, by the way, I think her husband is joining us via Zoom today, so that would be really nice. She was born in 1946 in Laurel, Mississippi. She was appointed to Boston Police Department May 9th of 1970. She made detective in 1984, and then sergeant in 1988, also sergeant detective in the same year. She became a deputy superintendent in 1995 and a superintendent in 1998, and that's how I knew her, as a superintendent. She served in Personnel, District B2, Area B, Internal Affairs, Training and Education, Legal Director of Labor Relations, Office of the Police Commissioner, and Administration Bureau. A little bit of her legacy. When James Creed was a little boy, he would watch his mother get dressed for work, pinning on a shiny silver Boston Police shield near her heart and fastening a gun belt around her svelte waist, and he felt a rush of pride. Florestine Flo Creed Jacobson had that effect on many people, and not her personally or as beloved her as much as her son. Women were proud of her because she was a pioneer, one of the first female Boston police officers to make it through the Boston Police Academy in 1979, when the blue blood of the department was primarily testosterone-fueled. Cops were proud of her because of her dignity she brought to the Boston Police, the honor and fairness, even during her stint as a commander in the Internal Affairs Division, and more recently as the superintendent overseeing the Office of Labor Relations. And they are two of the toughest jobs in the department. He said, "Even when I was young, I knew my mother was different, working in a male-dominated world. My friends would see her in uniform and say to me, 'Your mom is something else,' and I would go, 'Yeah, she is.'" James Creed, who at the time this was written was 38, this is about 15 years old now, he was a Boston firefighter at the time working at Beacon Hills Engine 4. Creed Jacobson took her last breath at her Mattapan home one Wednesday in 2005 on her 59th birthday. She will be remembered. She's still remembered all the time by the people that knew her. The respected Boston police superintendent was diagnosed with stage 4 lung cancer after having never smoked a cigarette in her life in 2003, just weeks after she and her husband, Alan, returned from their honeymoon. The couple had been together for 13 years before they married, and he says that he did not just see the striking woman standing there, he felt her. She was captivating, he remembered. "I saw the way she held herself," he said. "It wasn't just her looks, it was her personality, her voice. It all resonated: integrity, compassion. Sometimes you have to pick up those things from someone in a very brief time," he said. Jacobson's gut was right that night. By then, Flo Creed had a reputation throughout the Boston Police Department for those very traits. She was a special woman. She was fair and had a lot of grace, says the Patrolmen's Association president. "A lot of people on this job just looked up to her," he said. Creed Jacobson faced her terrible disease with the same unfailing determination she used to get through years of night school to earn her law degree. Battling the cancer with the same type of single-mindedness that helped her pass the bar the first try. Refusing to be beaten down, she continued to work at One Schroeder Plaza up until right before she passed away. So she not only exuded integrity and professionalism, but she was truly one of the nicest people I've ever met, said Police Commissioner at the time, Kathleen O'Toole. On the day Creed Jacobson became the Boston Police Department's first black female deputy superintendent in 1994, her own mother's words were what came to her mind. Creed Jacobson told a Herald reporter, "The only thing that beats failure is a try." I made it.
So I would like to tell you about Maria Mitchell. As you can see, she lived from 1818 to 1889 and was America's first female astronomer. Some of you who have been to Nantucket may have been to the Maria Mitchell Association and Observatory, and I would highly recommend a visit there if you haven't. Maria was also a librarian, a naturalist, and an educator. Born to a Quaker family who believed that their girls as well as boys should be educated in all subjects, including the sciences, which her father loved. At age 12, she helped her father calculate the position of their home by observing a solar eclipse. At age 17, recognizing that many other girls at that time, remember this is like the 1830s now, were not getting the kind of education that she was getting, she founded a school for girls. And the first 3 girls who applied to come to the school were 3 young African American girls who were being denied education at any of the other schools. She admitted them as well as other girls and gave them an education and grounding in all of educational topics, but especially in the sciences, which she loved so much. In 1847, she observed and discovered a comet, which later was named Miss Mitchell's Comet. In 1865, she became the first professor of astronomy at the newly founded Vassar College and the first female member of the American Association of Sciences. She was an inspiration to many, many women over any number of years. And as I said, I would highly recommend, if you're in Nantucket, that you go to the association. There are 2 observatories and things on her life. And she was certainly well ahead of her time in many areas and lived out her Quaker faith.
Thank you, Linda. Thank you, Lynn. And thank you to Flo and to Maria. Each week we have an opportunity to give thanks for the blessings we have received in our lives and in the life of our church community. Our morning offering is a chance to give back in support of the work and outreach of our church. You may submit your offering electronically by following the link in the chat, or mail it to All Souls at the address also provided in the chat. And if you are seated in our pews, our usher will be coming around with the basket. At this time, our morning offering will be given and received. As we go marching, marching, unnumbered women dead go crying through our singing their ancient call for bread. Small art and love and beauty, their drudging spirits new. Yes, it is bread we fight for, but we fight for roses too. As we go marching, marching, we bring the graver days. The rising of the women meets the rising of the race. No more the drudge and idler tend that toil where one reposes, but a sharing of life's glories. Bread and roses, bread and roses. My life shall not be sweated from birth until life closes. Heart, soul, as well as body. Bread and roses, bread and roses. As we go marching, marching. That's one of the suffragists' anthems. Our responsive reading is called A New Manifestation, and it's written by Margaret Fuller, who was one of the early women suffragists, who was also Unitarian. A new manifestation is at hand. A new hour is come.
When people of all genders may be regarded as equal, we are able to appreciate and prophesy to one another.
A new manifestation is at hand. A new hour is come.
People who identify as female need, as a nature, to grow, as an intelligence to discern, and as a soul to live freely and unimpeded, to unfold such powers as were given them.
A new manifestation is at hand. A new hour is come.
People who identify as male have not had their fair share either. Their energies are repressed and distorted by the interposition of artificial obstacles.
A new manifestation is at hand. A new hour is come.
We would have every arbitrary barrier thrown down. We would have every path laid open to people of all genders.
Were this done, we believe a divine energy would pervade all nature to a degree unknown in history of former ages.
A new manifestation is at hand. A new hour is come.
May it be so. Many of you have heard the story about my grandmother who left her husband and her country to make a better life for herself and her 4 children in the United States. Her mother had died in childbirth after bringing 22 children into the world. This was the norm during the 1800s in Canada, as France sought to encourage settlement in the New World. After the birth of her 4th child, my grandmother recognized her body had become a commodity to her husband and her country. And she knew deep down, a woman's worth is greater than the pleasures of her body or the labors of her womb. So she strengthened her resolve and planned her escape to the United States, where she remained a single parent and became a successful businesswoman, homeowner, and landlord. My grandmother is a legend in our family and an inspiration to me as someone who is always chafed at the limits put upon me because of my sex. In my mind, aptitude and interest are the only qualifiers that matter. Like most of us, I grew up in a male-dominant culture that believed women were inferior to men. A woman's sphere was in the home, and her most noble occupation was motherhood. Betty Friedan, writer and staunch feminist, called this prescribed role the feminine mystique. And it is the life my mother lived. Not unlike my grandmother, I wanted something more for myself. As the only girl in a family of 4, my contributions to any conversation were consistently, no exaggeration, ignored by my 3 older brothers, unless my younger brother thought my idea had merit and used it for his own gain without proper credit. Sounds like it's happened to you all too. I was further excluded by the Roman Catholic Church when I was unable to participate in the Mass as an acolyte, as my brothers had, or be a reader from the lectern, because I was a girl. Exclusion from the priesthood based on my sex became even more painful when I realized I am a lesbian. Thankfully, I discovered Unitarian Universalism at the age of 37, and when I met our new minister and learned she was a lesbian from a blue-collar family, I thought I had died and gone to heaven. I received my call to ministry at the age of 45 and entered seminary at the age of 50. A friend who had witnessed my call and knew of my struggles with the Catholic Church suggested I visit the Women's History Museum in Seneca Falls, New York, before I start seminary. Have any of you been there? Oh my, let me tell you. Seneca Falls, New York is where the first women's rights convention was held. And at that convention, Elizabeth Cady Stanton presented the Declaration of Sentiments for Women's Suffrage in 1848. And just an aside, not only that, but Elizabeth Cady Stanton would write her own version of the Bible so that it included women. I love this woman. The declaration she drafted is modeled after the U.S. Constitution and highlights the exclusion of women in all aspects of civic life. I will never forget how life-changing and affirming it was for me to immerse myself in the strength and conviction of these women represented at the museum. Outside, there is a monument to the Declaration and its signers. Etched in a long, slanted granite wall, a thin sheet of water perpetually flows over the words of the Declaration. As I read the Declaration and each of its sentiments, I stopped when I came upon these words. Quote, "He allows her in church, but in a subordinate position, claiming apostolic authority for her exclusion from the ministry." There it was, written in stone and not a figment of my imagination. My hand passed through the water to touch the words etched in granite. And I was overcome by a flood of healing emotion and thankful that it was a cloudy, rainy day and I was the only one there. After reading the declaration in its entirety, I meditated upon the name of each person who had signed it, as if I had gone back in time to thank each one personally for the freedoms they had won, the freedom that made it possible for me to become a minister. When I was planning my ordination for March 8th, 2020, I did some research on the date and discovered it was International Women's Day. And it was also the last gathering before the pandemic broke out. It was the only day when all the dignitaries could attend. I had no idea the significance of the date. I didn't even know such a thing existed as Women's Day. And on the altar at my ordination was a picture of my mother, who had died while I was in seminary. Religion plays no small part in the subordination of women. The creation story shared by Christians, Muslims, and Jews is a cornerstone of the historical bias towards women. You know the story. Eve tempts Adam with the forbidden fruit from the tree of knowledge, and humankind is expelled from paradise. As one author in my research put it, and nothing was ever right after that. The feminist bumper sticker that proclaims Eve was framed has merit. The literal interpretation of this creation myth is responsible for the exclusion of women from the right to formal education around the world. Patriarchal religions claim women are redeemed through suffering and obedience to the limitations imposed upon them by men in religion and society. Philosophy has played an important role in the portrayal of women as well. As early as 300 BC, Aristotle claimed women are innately inferior to men because they were created with a defect by the Creator. I can say more during coffee hour about that. '17th century French philosopher René Descartes devised an elaborate separation between the mind and body that would define the roles of men and women. The distinction, Descartes claimed, was that spiritual truths could be accessed only through the mind, and carnal pleasures and procreation could only be achieved through the body. The intellect, and therefore spiritual knowledge, were seen as the eminent domain of men, and the sensual pleasures of the body and giving birth were the domain of women. And soon, good and evil were represented by male and female. These negative theologies of women are not divinely ordained. They are the ideas of men. They are the social and religious constructs designed to preserve a world that subjugates women and elevates men. And sadly, they are still alive and well today. While I was in seminary, I visited a same-sex Unitarian Universalist couple with 2 small children under the age of 5. And suddenly, we hear the older brother upset with his little sister blurting out, "You're evil!" To which she replied, 3 years old, "I'm not evil. You're bad. You hurt me." And the little boy explained to her, "No, I'm not evil. I'm a boy. Only girls are evil." Their feminist parents were mortified. How do our children absorb these messages at such a tender, young age? We also saw this negative theology of women express itself in Hillary Clinton's historic presidential campaign in 2016, when she was described by her opponent as a nasty woman. This is the espousal of patriarchy in its struggle to maintain social, political, and economic power over women. The suggestion to lock her up is a reference to a time in our nation's history when men could arbitrarily institutionalize women who were too ambitious because they rebelled against the limitations imposed upon them. It disturbs me greatly to know that women's rights have yet to be protected by the Constitution of the United States. The Equal Rights Amendment, originally written by Alice Paul in 1923, a woman in possession of 3 law degrees. And it wasn't until the 1960s when Bella Abzul, Betty Friedan, and Gloria Steinem championed the bill, and it finally passed the US House and Senate in 1972. The ball started rolling in 1923, and it finally passes the House and Senate in 1972. Any amendment to the US Constitution, however, requires the ratification of 38 states. And with a time limit clause, excuse me, with a time limit clause of 10 years, only 35 states ratified the amendment. We were 3 states short. Legal experts argue that no amendment to the US Constitution has ever had a time limit set on ratification, while others suggest we simply extend the time limit and continue to pursue ratification. Credit for the defeat of the ERA is given to Phyllis Schlafly's campaign, which appealed to the more conservative view of women's role as mother and housewife. She believed greater sex equality would change gender roles and lead to a moral decline in society. And she also lobbied to protect women as the mothers of the white race. In lieu of the Equal Rights Amendment, women have sought protections through state legislation and Supreme Court cases. In 1972, Title IX, a federal civil rights law that prohibits the exclusion and discrimination of women in education programs that receive federal funding. 1974, I remember it well, I was allowed to mortgage property and take out a credit card in my own name without a male cosigner. And in 1973, the Supreme Court ruling in the case of Roe v. Wade gave women reproductive rights over their own bodies. While these gains are important, any one of them can be reversed without the ratification of the Equal Rights Amendment. And a look at the economic disparity currently between men and women tells us that the fight for women's equality in our nation is far from over. According to the Pew Research Center, there are 2 states who pay only 60 cents on the dollar compared to their male counterparts. 16 states pay 70 cents on the dollar to women. 31 pay 80 cents on the dollar. And only 1 state pays 90 cents, Vermont. So as we celebrate the achievements of women in our lives, in history and around the world, let us also remember there is much more work to be done. Perhaps now, with a woman in the second highest office of our federal government and more women in the US Senate and House of Representatives than ever before, and a global resurgence in the women's movement, we might finally declare and protect the equality of women in the Constitution of the United States. One can hope. As Unitarian Universalists, we come from a long line of social activists, and among them were the prominent leaders of the women's rights movement, which includes Elizabeth Cady Stanton, Lucretia Mott, and Margaret Fuller. It's our time now to bring this important issue across the finish line. It's on us. After the War of Independence in 1776, Jane Addams, a Unitarian suffragist, wrote to her future husband and President of the United States, John Adams, with the following. In the new code of laws, which I suppose will be necessary for you to make, I desire you would remember the ladies and be more generous and favorable to them than your ancestors. Do not put such unlimited power into the hands of husbands. Remember, all men would be tyrants if they could. If particular care and attention is not paid to the ladies, we are determined to foment a rebellion and will not hold ourselves bound by any laws in which we have no voice or representation. And so, in the spirit of Jane Addams, I offer this anonymous quote that I wear on a t-shirt. They whispered to her, "You cannot withstand the storm." And she whispered back, "I am the storm." May it be so. Our closing music is by Alicia Keys, and it's called Superwoman. And there's a part in the song where she says, "Even when I'm a mess, I still put on my vest with the S on my chest." Enjoy. Our closing words are by Margaret Mead. Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has. May it be so. As we extinguish the flame of this chalice, may each of us carry its light into every day of our lives.
Something about the way
just quickly, and then we're done. In this morning's service, and see, I can do this without crying as long as I'm not talking about my boss. Zoom host Kelly Kingsman, our virtual usher, actually our in-person usher, Ross Edwards. I was the service associate. Jacob, of course, thank you, and our Reverend Beau Rivers. And do you want me to do the announcements from here? Okay, so, and our virtual usher, Mary Mitchell, Lynn Steiner and Maureen Crimmins were outstanding. And coffee volunteers, George Goss, Joe Maloney, Mark and I, and John Cobble. So have a wonderful week, everybody. Oh, announcements too. Okay, announcements. Connection circles via Zoom, 4 o'clock on Tuesday, March 27th. That will be an open conversation. And 10 a.m. Friday the 1st, the topic is to be determined. The writing group, which also meets via Zoom, 4 o'clock on Wednesday the 28th. And the Service and Music Committee has a meeting on Monday the 4th at 6:30 p.m. And the book group is meeting 7 o'clock on Tuesday, April 5th. And we do need people to sign up for volunteers at coffee hour. And that's really it.